Well, because I was always learning in the evening or in the morning, I never really had much conflict. But when it comes to homework or something that's very school related outside of school, I had to figure out which things were more important. And was it more important to go fly, or was it more important to go to a sleepover at my friend's house or something? So I had to kind of prioritize a lot of that daily, week to week things. So instead of making a plan with my friend on the weekend, which at my age is kind of normal, I would leave that weekend open to go flying. And I'd say that's not much of a loss because it's still fun either way.
What do your friends think about this?
A lot of the times they don't. There's a lot of different reactions. Some people are completely baffled that I've done it, and then for some people I don't think it's. They like need time to let it sink. So I'll tell someone, oh, I can fly, and they say, oh, cool, and that's it. And it's one of those moments where I was like, what do you mean that's cool? But I appreciate the friends who do give me a bunch of support.
And so, Marguerite, I'll turn to you now. Whenever you were on these ferry flights, what's kind of like the longest amount of time that you would spend in the air, per day?
That really varies a lot with the type of aircraft I'm flying. I mean, in the early years, these were planes that were tanked with extra fuel tanks and extra range. So I would go in a little Mooney, for example, from Canada, like from St. John's direct to Genoa in Italy. So you have 14, 16-hour flights. And I still remember one occasion where actually the Italian tower controller came down. It was the first non-stop traffic from Canada, which I thought was kind of funny in a small plane. But the average now, let's say the last couple of years, the type of aircraft I fly mainly, you're talking like 3 hours to Scotland, 2.5 hours to Iceland, you talk 2.5 hours maybe to Greenland if I stop there, or 4 hour, 4.5 hour, 5 hour flight if I don't stop in Canada. So it's all like between, let's say, 2.5 and 5.5 hours in average. Now, I do in general 2 legs on my first day with this particular aircraft. And then I have 3 or 4 legs the next day. The second day is normally a little bit longer. Depends on destination and things like that.
And Alina, how long were you up in the air for when you were on your way to Wisconsin every day?
Most of my flights were longer than 60 miles, but in a regular aircraft that would be probably a 20-minute flight or something around that time. But for me, since I only go about 15 miles an hour, and the wind's also going directly at me, sometimes a 60-mile flight goes from being an hour long to an hour and 30 minutes long. So those flights sometimes got pretty long for me, especially just sitting down, not seeing the ground, it's not moving anymore.
And when you were giving your presentation earlier, something that stood out to me I thought was interesting was just all of the different factors that you have to take into consideration when you're up there. You mentioned having to listen for other airplanes and communicate with them. Kind of like walk us through what are some examples of what you might be communicating with them up there.
So, pretty much what you're mainly trying to do as communicating, because you're not on the ground and you can't see the airplanes, you're constantly telling the other airplanes your position. So, for example, I don't have a tail number because I'm not registered. I don't have the aircraft I fly isn't registered. So instead of say 411 Victor Victor, I'd say blue and yellow ultralight. And for some of the airplanes to be like, what does your airplane look like? So they can look out for me. But I would say I'm 5 miles out from the airport, looking to do a straight in. So if I didn't hear anybody talking, I would plan to just land right on the runway without going through the pattern.
that story about the engine failure, did you ever have a moment after that where you considered, maybe I don't want to do this anymore? That'd be scary, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, maybe the first one you say, okay, it's bad luck or whatever, you know, you have a second experience. But then when the third experience comes, you go like, yeah, you start thinking about it, I admit this. But in my position, the third emergency I had, I actually crashed the aircraft in '83, and I survived it. The aircraft was totaled, and I was really thinking if I should pursue this. I mean, I didn't have kids yet or anything, but still it was a matter of, yeah, I'm not sure this is very close. What actually helped me was the dealer I flew the aircraft for in Germany said something. He called me and he said, well, you didn't finish the job. The replacement one is ready in 3 weeks. And I really had to swallow for a moment, and then I thought, well, he's kind of right, I didn't finish the job. So anyway, then somebody said, well, it's like riding a horse, you have to get back on the horse. So you get all these common kind of sentences and sayings people will throw at you. And so I had enough pressure to do the trip, and of course, yeah, it was like getting back on the horse, I guess. You know, that flight was successful, and I was back in it, so. Yeah, but the thought was there, and it was '83, I have to admit.
Have you had any scary moments when you were up in the air, Luna?
The main scary moments was during when I had to learn to go from zero wind to turbulence. So for a normal airplane, 20 knots is like, oh, it's a beautiful day, let's go flying. But for me, I get tossed around more, and probably my most difficult flight was when I was battling with that thunderstorm and thinking, well, should I keep going, or should I turn around, or should I revert to another airport? So I could see the clouds kind of forming above me, and I could also see the rain in the distance. And I was like, the rain's over there, airport's right there. I'm pretty sure I can make it there. And I didn't realize that because of all the wind from the airport, or not the airport, that was coming from the thunderstorm, I wasn't moving as fast as I would have liked to. So it came to a point when it started getting windier, and I was constantly checking on the clouds and like where the rain was. And I started looking at the clouds more, and I started slowly climbing. So I went from 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet, and I look at the ground, I'm like, those trees look smaller than usual. And then I hit this really rough spot, and I was struggling with it. Probably if you were to fly it, and you fly a Honda jet, correct? So in a Honda jet, you could probably zoom right through that little piece of wind and probably wouldn't even feel it. It's like when you step on a fly or something and you don't even notice it. But that was probably my scariest experience, because it was really one of those things that I questioned. And I said, am I going to get to the ground? Is this going to be where I crash or something?
That is scary. So I'll ask you both this, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But what advice would you have for someone who is hoping to learn how to fly and break out into this aviation industry?
I'd say that sometimes for newer pilots, it's very discouraging when it doesn't work immediately. Or, in other words, when you're riding a bike, it takes a few days to learn, and there's some other activities that are very rewarding in the end that don't take as long a process. When it comes to flying, you have to be really prepared before you go up into the air. You can't, it's not like the night before a test you study just a little bit so you can kind of pass it. It's where you have to be prepared. You can't just go into the air semi-prepared, because then that could lead to a not so fun falling over on your bike.
Very well said.
Yeah, I personally think, everybody has a hobby, and if you are having the smallest idea about going to fly, or, you have a little experience, you flew with somebody once, and you really want to become a pilot, you go for it. And like Elena says, there's a lot of practice to it. To become a pilot, flying itself, I think, is not that difficult. It's like they say, the landing is the most difficult part. Taking off takes a little bit, but you have to really want it too. There's a lot of commitment, and there's also, in the end, a lot of knowledge, because you have to study all different things. It's not just that you say, oh yeah, sure, I go into the air, I know how to move the plane up and down and left and right. In the end, you have to study a lot of meteorology, you know a lot about the mechanics of everything. There's a lot of navigation. Even today with GPSs and stuff, it got a lot easier. But, you have airspaces and everything else. So it is a commitment, and it becomes a full-time job in the end, even if you only have it, and I shouldn't say only, but even if it's just a hobby, so to speak. It still is a hobby that demands a lot and demands kind of responsibility. And I think I'm amazed how Elena figured this out with responsibility and stuff. And like you said, it's sometimes discouraging when you see the cars go faster than you are flying or something like that. Which happens with a bad wind, and of course especially in a smaller aircraft. I have been there, and as a matter of fact, my last flight was a fairly big aircraft, and I had 180 knots headwind, so you'll be actually logging backwards flying, But when I see in a plane like that, like 60 knots, 70 knots ground speed or something, it's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? So all these things come in it. It's not something you can just say, well, as she said, you can't just read up on it and figure it works. There's a lot more to it.
Thank you both. That was great advice. So now we're going to take some questions. Okay, I see a hand over there.
Hi, Elena. This is Steve Black. We know each other. Sublet Patrol. But anyway, I'm curious as to what's your next aviation milestone and what's your ultimate aviation goals? Your ultimate goals.
So,
Very wild, right?
so hopefully my next goal is to actually get my license and fly a regular airplane, or a Cessna, and soloing that. Since I still have 2 years ahead of me, I can start practicing for that. And as my dad's told me sometimes, he wants to give me or help me as much as I can, so that he can, when I kind of leave the nest, that I have everything I need. He's like, I'd like to go to the Air Force Academy and the Air Force in my future. So he wants to prepare me and say, like, here you go, she knows this. Have fun. So hopefully, from his words, he says that the minimum is to get my pilot's license, and then maybe twin engine or double engine, I'm not sure what it's called, twin engine rating, and some of those other add-ons that you can have to fly more complex airplanes.
Great question. Anybody else have a question? Okay, see that.
I'm not sure you can hear me, but I want to thank Patrons Point for having us tonight. And I'm just curious, how many women aviators are in the audience? Can you stand?
Yeah.
How many women aviators?
I love the differences between the two, the ages.
been times where, like I have a very close friend of mine, and I go to ROTC. I'm part of the ROTC unit at my school, and so is she. And so there's been times where she's like, "That's really cool. I want to do that too." And I'm like, "Yes, do that." Sometimes it's really hard to convince my friends, but she's one of the people that I've been able to kind of get her interested, and now every once in a while she'll talk to me about it, and hopefully at some point, maybe in the next couple of years while she's in high school, she starts pursuing to become get her license. And I also believe in Civil Air Patrol, that's another program I'm part of. There has been several younger cadets that have been very interested and inspired by my story, and now they're nagging their parents and asking for every opportunity they can, and that's really wonderful.
Marguerite, how did you pass up the astronaut era? Were you ever tempted to go in that direction?
I probably would have loved to, and the closest, to be honest, I have ever talked about it, I had a customer on board who was in the SpaceX program, and he was talking to me about it at the time. I mean, this goes back a number of years, that they were equipping a Learjet with all the kind of protection to go out of the atmosphere and come back in. And I said to him at the time, and we were just talking in the cockpit, and he said, well, you know, he could really see me doing this, yada yada, and of course I was rather flattered when he brought this up. But then I said to him, I said, so why don't you do that? And he says, oh no, I have a wife and kids, and probably that thing is not going to come back in. And I was actually thinking what he said, but I didn't totally discard it. I came home and I started talking about it with my husband and the girls at the dinner table. And my one daughter totally freaked out instantly and says, Mom, you're so selfish. This is unbelievable that you even consider this. I said, I'm not considering it. I'm just talking about it. She says, no, but you know, this is just unbelievable. And she was a young teenager, so she was like 12, 13, something like that. And so anyway, I never went that way. I never had really the opportunity to consider it, you know, but I probably would have loved it, to be honest, you know, or at least had the chance to do it. But like I said, I'm looking back, I don't think I missed out on much. So I'm very, very lucky, yeah.
Give a couple more. Anybody else?
This one asks Elena, what's the approximate empty weight of the aircraft you fly? Empty weight.
256 pounds.
256 pounds, according to Dad.
Not an ounce over.
Yeah. So,
Did anybody else have any questions? Or okay.
Will you be flying the air this year?
probably not the whole trip, but I plan to fly at the show. This at Southern Fun, the kind of second best air show down in Florida. I'm planning to fly there in April.
Any more? Any other questions?
Marguerite, if you had one more wish, what would it be?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say, you know, but I was very, very close to being a jet fighter once. Then it didn't really work out. I think that would be one of the highlights still. I have done pretty much everything else, like balloon, helicopter, you know. I used to parachute together with my daughter quite a bit. So I think that part is kind of missing. Like I said, the space program I know is out, and it's not even some fantasizing about that. I'm way too old for that by now. But to get a ride in like a fighter jet or something, that would be kind of cool.
Alina, when are you gonna start learning how to drive?
In 2 years.
Ladies, want to add anything else before we wrap up? Do you have any questions for each other?
I have one. So, during your flights, were there ever any times where you found yourself, like, for me at least, there's been times where I've been flying and it's just been one of those moments where you kind of take in what's around you and you kind of feel like you're part of the airplane. One time I saw the sunset and like it was really misty and it was one of those really serene moments. Have you ever had anything like that?
Yeah, for me, this is mainly in the northern hemisphere when I can get a hold of the northern lights. It's very, very magical. Somehow, you keep taking pictures, but you also sit back and you're just staring at it, and then you're thinking of all the stories you have heard, like people believing in ghosts and this and that, and because they keep moving and stuff. It is, like you said, very surreal. It's even more magnificent than a sunset. I know the early years, it's the sunset, the sunrise that gets you, because it's, you're not flying at night much yet or so. But like in my job, those are the highlights. Those are the pictures I send to all different pilots or back to the factory, and they have the little factory magazine, and of course they show that because it's something not many people see that often or regularly. And still, as much as you see it in a way regularly, it does not become any less special, because every time it's different. It's like a sunset or a sunrise in the end, there's not one that is twice there, it can be just fantastic that way. And I also have developed the habit to say, even if I'm alone in the plane, we are landing, or, position, we are. It's like the plane and me. It's not even that there is a second person in the plane sometimes, but it has become a habit, and some people say, who else is on board? Well, I'm sorry, it's just her and me, the plane,
All right, well, I think we are about to wrap up, so thank you both for sharing your incredible stories with us all. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Megan and we'll wrap up.
Thank you everybody for coming on behalf of the USS Yorktown Foundation and Patriots Point. I know I'm leaving here inspired, and I hope you are too. These are some incredible women. So can we just all give them a round of applause and appreciate them sharing their stories. If you'd like to learn more about the Yorktown Foundation or Patriots Point in general, you can find me after the program, and I'm happy to share my information or answer any questions that you may have. But again, just thank you so much for coming out tonight and spending your Thursday night with us and bearing with us through the technical difficulties, because what a story, what stories to hear. So thank you so much.